Okay, so Jules asked a question over on YouTube. Says, I'm writing a sci-fi story. I was wondering your opinion on this. Should I do the world building separately before I write the main story, or do it as I write? Ali said I always do my world building first because it helps connect and ground scenes that you'll know to establish. So there's no right way or wrong way to do it. What Ali said can be helpful. I can give you some insight into the work that I've done in the past, because there are some times when I like having that additional like framework in place to flesh out a short story, and then there's other times when I don't feel that it's necessary. So I think that most of the time when I'm writing a short story, I prefer to sort of have only a vague notion of what's going on most of the time. A good example of this is if you look at, I have an anthology called Bloody Knuckles, which is a collection of it's a collection of spec fic sci-fi and fantasy short stories. And there are some in there. For example, there's a story, I can't remember the name of it now off the top of my head, but it's an errant knight who's on his way to take out the big bad guy, and he has a talking horse. And the overall theme of the story is that's it. Like, he is part of an adventurers guild. This Black Knight is an ex-member of that guild who went rogue, and he, as a member of the guild, is on his way to take out that errant Black Knight. And he's the White Knight, that's the Black Knight, good, evil, dark, light, that kind of stuff. Very simple concept. It doesn't need a backstory. Most of it is just the dialogue between the knight and his horse. It's all first person. It doesn't need anything more than that. It's because it's just about that. That's it. Then I have a short story on a character who is he's a smuggler. It's a science fiction story, and he's going after this android who's out to kill him. So he's got to try to kill the android before it kills him first. And in that story, as I was writing that story, I ended up meeting a side character, and they had some dialogue in a cantina. And while I was writing the dialogue for that cantina, I was like, man, it feels like these two have more of a backstory than just what's happening here, because I really liked how the dialogue was coming out between them. And so with that story in particular, I wrote that story. I then went away from that story, and I created an entire backstory for those two characters, which then led me to creating another series, multiple additional short stories with those characters, which then turned into the concept for a full-length novel about that character whose name is Donovan. So sometimes, as is the case of the horse and the knight, you don't need a backstory. You don't need a complicated world. It's just a very short, 5,000 word short story. It's an adventure, and you're done. Other times you'll be writing something and you'll be like, oh man, that sounds cool. Let's flesh that idea out more. Where it can be useful to have done the legwork is if you're going to be writing longer short stories, because it can help to have that framework in place to help detail things. But I will also say this: if the objective is just to write a quick short story, and I'm thinking more along the lines of if you're doing this for submission, right? Because the object with a short story is to write it as quickly as possible to get it into submission as quickly as possible. Because it's really hard to make a living as a writer, and I say this as someone who made a living as a writer for many, many years. It's very hard to make a living as a writer doing short stories unless you get very good at quick. You got to be quick. And quick is taking 5 ideas or less, throwing them into the paper, making it work within 5,000 to 8,000 words, and putting it to the side and moving on to the next one. You need to be able to write one short story every week, minimum, to be able to crank those out, to be able to make a living, because you're only going to be making $500 to $700 per short story if you're lucky. If you're really good, maybe you'll make $1,500, $2,000 per short story, but most people who are selling short stories are going to be in that $500 to $700 range. So if you want to make a living as a short story writer, you have to crank those fuckers out as quickly as you can. And that means you have to be really good at making mashed potatoes. And what I mean by that is you got to be good at throwing a bunch of stuff in a pot, whipping it up really quick, putting it on a plate, and sending it out. You're not trying to make a gourmet dish with a short story, right? So that's one potential thing to help if you're writing it for the purpose of selling as many as you can. Now, what you'll find in the process of doing this is that as you write 50 short stories in a year, you're going to find yourself spending or wanting to spend more time with some stories other than other ones, right? So that's when you get into the process of write quick, throw shit away into the back burner, don't look at it again for 2-3 months. Your objective is to write a whole bunch of stuff as quickly as possible, and then just get a whole bunch of stuff banked, then come back to it 3 months later and come at it with fresh eyes when you do the editing process, so that you've had time to, you've put it out of your mind, it's gone away, you're not tied to it, it's not your baby. You can come at it with a set of critical eyes, and then you can look at it and say, okay, this idea worked, this idea didn't work, this idea could be fleshed out more, this idea needs to be thrown away, this short story doesn't work at all, like maybe this could be repurposed into something different. You have to get really good at production. And production requires you to be very clinical, you can't be emotional, you have to look at it through the editor's eyes, and that means you got to write it, put it away, forget about it, because otherwise you're too attached to it. So these are all some, off-the-cuff tips for many years of writing. Now, I will say this. I can't write novels without having a complicated world already built. So when I'm looking at writing a novel, or if I know I'm going to be spending a lot of time in that world, then it behooves me to take the time to create the actual world, come up with all of the races, the religions, the political structure, a world map. All of those things can be useful because I know I'm going to be spending a lot of time in that world. So for a novel-length project, definitely you need to take the time to have done your world building, because otherwise you're going to find yourself along the way. It can be dangerous to do that while you're writing the novel, because you'll end up coming up with ideas that sound great in the moment, but then when you come back for that edit pass 3 months down the road, you're going to come back to this jumbled mess of things that don't really work together, and you're like, wait, he said he was doing this for 3 weeks and that this event happened here, but then I read over here, this was this other section, and that totally doesn't make sense with what he said he was doing here. You'll find that can tend to happen if you're making it up as you go and you're crafting a long story. So outlines are extremely useful for this, and you can only have an outline if you've done the world building. So I think it's Kevin J. Anderson we'll talk about. He'll spend often, and I think Brandon Sanderson has even talked on this to some degree. These guys will often spend more time doing the world building than they will actually writing the book. And the reason is because what you really want to have in place is all of the framework. So if you have your world building all done, and you have your outline and your story beats all done, and you have your chapter outline, all you have to do then is fill in the blanks. So Kevin J. Anderson, I would highly recommend you pay attention to this guy. #1 best-selling author, New York Times. He's written a ton of Star Wars novels. He's just done a ton of stuff over there. Kevin J. Anderson is a phenomenal writer. He does the Dune novels, the prequel novels with Brian Herbert. He is a phenomenal writer. And he does something that I do, which is dictation software. He does not write by hand. What he does is he is famous for, he takes a dictaphone, a handheld recorder, and he goes on these long hikes in locations that look like the place of the books that he's writing. And what he does is he spends a lot of time in advance creating the outline and the chapter framework. And the chapter framework includes, it could be 2 or 3 sentences, it could be 2 or 3 paragraphs about what's supposed to happen in that chapter. And then he goes out and he will dictate the chapter as he's hiking, and he'll do multiple chapters per day. And he has a word count that he shoots for his chapters, which is, there's a bunch of science to the modern reader, how much they're willing to read in a single setting, how people don't bookmark the way they used to. So there's science to having shorter chapters that are 3,000 words in length, as opposed to the old Robert Jordan way of doing things of having 10,000 word chapters. And he has done so much legwork on the outlining and the chapter that it's very quick to just come in and fill in the blanks. And he's already been thinking about it for weeks and sometimes months, because he has spent all that time doing the world building in advance. So when it comes to writing the chapter work, it's very quick and very easy, because he's already been immersed in that world for a very long period of time. So again, for me, I think that when it comes to short stories, sometimes it makes sense to have a complicated framework in place if you think you're going to be writing a series of short stories. One example of this is a few years ago, I think it might be 3 years ago, we did a little experimental project with our YouTube channel members where we had everybody, we sort of did like a collaborative anthology concept where we basically, everybody pitched a bunch of ideas into a hat, and I only did this for the channel members on YouTube. It was a very specific thing. It was a limited time thing. And we went through and we filtered these ideas out, and we came up with a world structure, and then the idea was to write a series of short stories around this location and this concept, and all of the short stories tied back to a series of events that was happening in this location. It was a science fiction story. It was a city built in the base of a crater where a ship had crashed, and the shields of the ship were still running, and they were protecting people from the harsh environment of the planet. And then it had been many generations that the ship had been crashed. Mythology had been created about who the people who crashed on there were, and the people had evolved because of the radiation and all this other stuff. And they had developed powers and all this. It was fun. And then around that framework was a series of short stories that were all related to that central location. Think Thieves World. Thieves World was an anthology series where there was a central city, and within that city there were lots of different characters who were having adventures, but it was a central location. And then they had many different authors working on short stories in the Thieves World series, and those Thieves World books spawned, that was in the 80s, like many different Robert Lynn Asprin, I think, is who headed that. So that concept of a central location with many short stories branching out from that central location, then it could be a good idea to have have a world building structure in place for the short stories. But if it's just, again, going back to, if your objective is to write as many short stories as possible for the purposes of selling them, then you got to get really good at being fast, efficient, and have your production pipeline incredibly streamlined. And for that purpose, I don't think it really serves the writer to spend a lot of time doing world building. I think in the process of writing those 50 stories in a year, you will get really good at writing a story every week, and hopefully more quickly than that. And then what you'll find when you go back to the editing process is you'll be able to pick the ideas that really stand out, and you can take those and flesh those into novellas if you really want to spend more time with them, or they can become ideas that turn into a book. You'll also find things along the way that you're going to throw away, because it's just, maybe it doesn't work as a short story, and you're going to look at it and go, you know what, I think that would be better done as a comic book, as a series of 3 stories. Like, and that's something that you'll get better with it as time goes on as a writer. I was always really, really good at making money. And so for me, speed and efficiency was always the most important thing, because I was a hungry little fucker, and I wanted to sell as many short stories as possible. So I got really good at production using dictation software. Dragon, naturally speaking, has always been my favorite choice, and getting really good at just getting ideas on paper and then just vomiting stuff out and then coming back to it later and refining it down from there. As a result of that, I'm really good at taking an idea and spinning it out into something. World building is also something that comes natural to me. I've done it a bunch now with different game projects and tabletop projects and everything else. Um, I might spend a few months doing world building. I might spend as little time as a month. Um, but the world building process definitely makes the ease of writing easier. It's a bad way to say that. Perfect reason why you edit, because when you're in the flow state, the ease makes it easier. That makes no sense grammatically, but you can come back and edit that shit later. So yeah, I would say 9 times out of 10, you don't need a complicated backstory for a short story, in my opinion. But sometimes the mood will strike, and you'll want to flesh something out more. But you also have to learn, if you're trying to make money as a writer, you're going to have to learn when to tell your brain to shut up. Shut up. No, we're not fleshing that idea out more. It's done. Because there is the thing about you can spend too much time on something and ruin it. Because the other thing is not everyone has the luxury of being Stephen King or George Lucas, where you can continually come back to things like the Dark Tower series or Star Wars and tweak it every 10 or 15 years with new ideas and then republish it. Like, not everyone is in that position to have billions of dollars to be able to do that. Most people have to, you write it, you finish it, you sit it off, you forget about it, because that's your job. You can't be tied to things, because, and it's hard as an early writer, because everything you write is going to be, you're like, it's my baby, no, you can't edit that out, no, that character needs to live, no, that sentence, and it's like, no, you gotta learn how to be clinical, unemotional, detached. It's just an idea. Get the words on paper, move on to the next thing. Anyway, that's my opinion, nothing more, based on my experience as a writer. I do have a boatload of stuff published. I never became a best-selling author. Doesn't necessarily mean anything. I made a living doing it for more than a decade. Technically longer than that, I think closer to 20 years. But I have 25 million words in print and digital over the course of the past 20 years. So I'm pretty efficient at it. It is super fun to write short stories. I prefer long format stuff to short stories, but I did a lot of short story writing in the early days. And I have done a handful over the years since then, but really in the early days of getting going as a writer, I spent a lot of time doing short stories because that was the way you did it back then. Like, if you wanted to break into the industry, it was submit a bunch of short stories, get a decent resume, and then you can start submitting and pitching. But I found that whole process to be so prolonged. You know, you're sending things out to an agent, waiting 6 months to a year to hear back from an agent. Then you have to wait a year for them to send it out to try to sell something. And then it's another year of, like, working with the editors. I mean, it's 3 years from the time you write something to get it into print before you ever even get paid for something. I found it much easier to just, go through the short story process, work with a bunch of people, and then self-publish longer projects, because you make more money in the long run. It's easier to build up a following on your own, and you don't have to wait that 3-year process. And I've been successful at it, so it's there's lots of ways to go about it. Get good at writing fast. Great question. Hopefully I was able to provide some insight. Again, there's no wrong way or right way to do it. Some it may feel more natural to you to do it on the way. Like, you want to write something and do it as you go.